welcome to this short presentation, short workshop, just to give you some insights and some tips on how to write strong conference proposals. Alors, la présentation, elle est bilingue. Les informations sont en français, en anglais. Sometimes I'll switch, sometimes I'll translate, sometimes I'll just give information in one of the two languages. But you'll have access to the presentation, and you can always contact me for the recording if you want to listen to it again. Alors, bienvenue. Mon nom, c'est Caroline Payant, professeure à l'UQAM. I'm the Vice-President of the ACLA Association. It's my second year, and I find it really valuable to talk about preparing conference proposals because it is a genre that we're not always familiar with. So in this presentation, I decided to also share some snippets of some pictures from last year's conferences. So if you see familiar faces, that's because they're from last year's conference in Toronto. Very briefly, conferences, they're very, very important. It is a way for us to develop and share new forms of knowledge. It is a way for us to develop professionally, to create a community of professionals, and importantly, a way of making bridges, connecting with others, et nouer des liens avec nos pairs. Dans notre domaine, les conférences sont tellement importantes justement pour networking and just building new knowledge forms. So we attend conferences, we participate at conferences, sometimes as attendees. As a newer member of the discourse community, usually we begin by attending a conference and eventually we start presenting. And so when you're thinking about your conference, so in this particular case, we're looking specifically at ACLA. Of course, every conference will have its own orientation, its own vision. So it's important to consider what is the goal of this conference? What does the community expect to hear? Donc, en plus de la vision, de la mission, qui participe? Des chercheurs, des professeurs. So knowing if it's more research-oriented or practitioner-oriented is really an important piece of understanding your conferences. And also you want to think, well, why do I attend? Is it just to showcase my research? No, it's also to be learning. And why are others attending? What do they want to get out of this? So when we think about a conference, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Every conference will sort of have their own rules and discourse community or expectations. So quand on parle d'un congrès, quand on parle d'une conférence, on pense à une communauté de pratique, a community of practice. So when we are part of this community of practice, we sort of have an understanding of how people engage with each other. We also start to have an understanding of how people talk, who they talk about, what are the prominent researchers, what are the values that are being shared. Ça, c'est des éléments très, très, très importants parce qu'on commence à connaître, à comprendre. Et puis, quand on parle d'une communauté de pratique, comme nouveau chercheur, as a new researcher, we start on the periphery, let's say, of this community of practice. But as we understand more and more how it works, so in this case, our community of practice is the applied linguists of Canada. It's a large community, but then we start understanding how we interact with each other and so on and so forth. So slowly and surely, we move more from the periphery of this community to the center, and then we start taking on bigger roles in that community. Donc, things to remember very briefly, we have a discourse community, we have shared objectives, des objectifs communs partagés. On a des moyens de communiquer et d'échanger des informations. So we have these expectations for communicating and exchanging information. And then we do follow particular rules and genres that are appropriate, or that are propres, qui sont propres à notre discipline. So they're particular to our field as well. So we start using specific jargon. And so we have to make sure that we are writing our proposals for the correct discourse community. And we learned that because sometimes the genres the abstracts were not available in the past, but increasingly you can find a lot of conferences that publish the proposals. So you get a sense of how people communicate and write and so on to join that discourse community through conferences. Alors, that being said, this was just a really quick introduction into thinking about your conference. And here we're zooming in on ACLA. There will be some similarities across conferences depending on their type, but and then you can start thinking about this and discussing with your peers or your mentors to see how does ACLA fit in the other conferences of our field. So always ask yourself at ACLA, who's my audience? I think the answer is primarily researchers. We do have researchers who are, of course, are practitioners, but it is very much a research-oriented community. Our contexts, they're quite large and diverse, so we want to be familiar with the different strands, the different areas of research that are, valued and sought after, if you like, at our conference. And then understanding as well how we present. What are the materials? Are there expectations to share materials? Well, at our conference, we do mostly these paper type presentations with, we don't read papers, we discuss our findings with the support of a PowerPoint or presentations of sorts. So we want to always think, how does it compare and how do I make it fit in what our case is a 20-minute presentation. Donc, il faut toujours situer notre congrès par rapport aux autres congrès. Alors, maintenant, the bulk of this presentation now is really to help us write those abstract and submit those proposals on time for this year's conference, if you're planning on presenting. This year is a little bit earlier. You notice November 15th as opposed to December. But it is primarily research-based proposals that are being submitted, and they can be in the format of a paper presentation, in the format of a poster presentation, which is always a very good way for, research in progress, or for new researchers if you're not yet comfortable speaking in front of a large crowd with many, attendees. Or there's always the symposium, but we won't be talking about that today necessarily. So the genre that we want to discuss today is sort of to understand that in the conference proposal, there are these moves that are quite common, and they're not only common, but they're sort of somewhat expected by those who are familiar with the genre and who serve as evaluators of the proposals. So based on some work that I did with a colleague and of course prior research, we were looking at the different moves of the different genres, and we took some of these proposals from a specific conference, so the TESOL conference, and we looked at research-oriented and practitioner-oriented proposals, and we identified these various moves, we call them rhetorical moves, donc des différents, I don't even have the French word now that I think about it, les gestes, no, I don't have the word in French, but sort of the steps, the moves that we expect to be in the proposal. Now, the order of these moves is somewhat flexible. There's going to be variation, but we often find these moves in a relatively stable order. Now, let's begin by looking at these. We have the territory, donc le territoire. Then we have the move called reporting previous research, donc faire appel à la littérature qui existe déjà. Then we have the gap, l'écart dans nos connaissances. Then we talk about the goal of your study, donc l'objectif de ton étude. To follow into means. Means is a weird term that was labeled by Halleck and Connor that we continue to use, but basically it's related to your findings and your results. But we find that there's two types of results that can be discussed. And then we have the outcomes. So sort of, sorry, I made a mistake. The means more in terms of the methodology, the outcomes in terms of the results, and finally, the benefits. Now, these are the big categories that we sort of expect to find within a proposal. So I'll go through these very quickly with some examples, and then that will give us some time after to do hands-on activities for those who want to stick around, or take this information, think about it, and then start working on your own proposal. On commence avec le territoire. Donc, le territoire va permettre au lecteur de savoir où se situe votre travail dans le milieu de la recherche ou de l'enseignement, mais peut aussi établir la situation dans laquelle l'activité de la proposition est placée physiquement. Donc, le contexte, là, on peut parler du Canada, on peut parler d'une université, bref. So it's important to set the territory, letting your audience know where this is taking place. Now, you'll notice that I try to keep the steps on the screen, so that way you can always refer to see where we're at. So here are some examples in terms of, just setting your territory. We can see the in yellow highlighted. Encouraging reflective teaching has become a widespread practice. This falls under the umbrella of teacher training, reflective teaching practices. It's very broad, it's very large, but it tells us, you know, we're not looking at vocabulary, we're not looking at grammar or form-based instruction, whatnot. It really is looking at teacher training. So we can see this is sort of establishing the field. Conversely, lower, we can see the development, I'm taking the third example randomly, the development of the academic word list and concordancing software has facilitated vocabulary teaching. So again, this is just setting the scene that we're going to be addressing within the large field of applied linguistic vocabulary instruction. So number one, setting the scene, the territory. This often appears as the first move. Donc c'est souvent l'établissement de votre territoire, de votre domaine, de votre sujet d'étude qui va être, disons, le but de votre proposition. Following this, usually, again, they tend to follow, these two moves tend to come together, reporting previous research. Alors, here we're talking about previous research in that field that was proposed by other researchers. And it can be reporting previous research, but it can also be sharing certain, debates over certain topics that are current in the field. So here, reporting previous research, this is an important part of your proposal. Let it be shown, however, that you only have 300 words. And so while this is a very important part, one of the biggest errors that I've seen when I evaluate proposals, I get such a complex literature review in the 300 words that there's no space for the other critical information. So reporting previous research, you have to be selective. You have to be selecting your references very carefully. The idea here is not to name drop, all of this research. You have to be very selective to show us who you're working with, where your work is situated. And again, you don't need to have an extensive list of references being cited, but you want to be careful. Here we go. So here, for example, we have this, and sometimes the moves are somewhat combined, okay? So here we have task-based language teaching and learning research informed by sociocognitive theories. So here we're kind of setting the territory, it's within the TBLT framework. And then we say that this field continues to examine how the design and implementation of input-output-based tasks foster language development and learner engagement. So here we see that there is some previous research. It's relatively recent. It's actually quite recent. I don't know why I said relatively. Sometimes it will be important to make reference to a seminal work. Donc, oui, des fois, on peut avoir une référence quand même assez ancienne, mais si c'est un travail critique, on va la mettre. Mais aussi, on veut mettre des travaux assez récents pour montrer que notre travail est pertinent en ce moment. Donc, un deuxième exemple ici en bas, on peut voir que les chercheurs se sont penchés sur ces tâches d'écriture. Donc, on a des références, on voit un peu où se situent les travaux qui ont déjà été faits. So, setting your territory, number one, followed by, showing us that you have the knowledge to carry this presentation. In a sense, this move is important because it does precisely that. It shows us your ability to contribute to the ongoing conversation by joining these other researchers. So that would be the third move. Moving along to then the gap. Really critical, a beautiful thing to write, a simple component of the proposal in the sense that this is where you're going to indicate that there is a lack of knowledge and there is a reason for your study. Donc, c'est très, très, très important de faire ressortir le fait que dans le domaine, il y a quelque chose, il y a un besoin qu'on a identifié, que ce soit au niveau de la théorie, au niveau de la pratique, mais c'est là qu'on va venir motiver notre étude. What's easy about this move in a sense is that we have key words that really make it salient. And so you want your proposal evaluators to quickly see like, oh, this has been rarely examined. Now make sure it's true. Don't just say that and then it's not true. But the idea is that you want to show that there is a need and that you will be bringing something useful and new to the field by this presentation. So here, notice these words, yet, blah, 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 which may not make some reference to. So we're showing a gap. Même chose, ces choses-ci n'ont pas fait l'objet d'études antérieures. However, these things don't guarantee that students do this. Therefore, encore all these strategies with keywords, connectors that will show that you are telling your reader who's reading many proposals, hey, c'est important. Je fais, j'apporte, je contribue. Alors, the gap is really important, which will then be followed mostly by the goal of your presentation. So typically the way I, envision in terms of the body of the proposal, by the time that I arrive at my objective, donc rendu à la présentation du but ou de l'objectif de mon étude, normalement, je suis à peu près à 100, autour de 120, 150 mots. It's about, you're running close to the halfway mark in a sense, because you've done all of these other strategies to bring us to what you will do. Donc ici, quand on parle du goal, de l'objectif, we are very clear about what this will entail. And so here we put some examples here. Donc, this presentation will discuss, again, using transition words that will allow us to just clearly connect to, okay, this is what I'll be expecting, very clear, perfect, I like it. Once you've done this, now it's really important to tell your readers so that they can evaluate, you're situating your study, you're showing us it's important, but then we want to make sure that what you're proposing holds. And so this is where we go into means, the so-called means one. There's two means. So the first one can basically, well, what it does is it tells us your research methodology. And you don't want to be too short on the details, but you can't provide too much again. So moi, je veux bien comprendre comment votre étude a été menée. Donc, est-ce que votre étude va répondre à l'objectif que vous proposez? So if I look at this more carefully, we can keep it short, but sometimes, this is not the entire part of an abstract, but sometimes it can be short, but then, you want to add the necessary information. So here we know it's a cross-sectional study. We're looking at pre-service teachers in a 7-week course. This doesn't provide the entire proposal. Following this, there was information about they conducted observations, et cetera, and so forth. But we can see that there is going to be a clear methodological component. This one in the French abstract, we can see a little bit more details because it details a procedure. So we have that les données ont été recueillies, on a le nombre de participants. Ensuite, on parle de la démarche, so really the research protocol. And then we mentioned that they were, les interactions ont été enregistrées, so on a des données, ensuite analysées, etc. So this will allow us to see if your methodological choices are sound, if it fits within the theoretical framework, and so on. Another means, it's again related to the methodology. Now, this one, you can, if you have the space in your proposal, to sort of let us know how you plan on organizing your talk. Now, this particular move is very common when you do sort of workshops or more pedagogical oriented pieces, because it could take a lot of different forms. But in a research-based paper, it's going to be very, very rare that somebody will say, first we'll discuss the literature, then the methodology, followed by the results to do a discussion. So you could probably omit this step if you're presenting a typical research design, because the plan of the talk will follow the research design. However, if you feel like you need to sort of, tell if you're going to have us engage in something, potentially you want to mention it. So that's means two. Almost at the end of these, we have two more typical moves, the outcomes and the benefits. For the outcomes, well, these are your results. Very plain and simple, you want to give results. Now, sometimes because we are in November writing for a conference that will take place in June, potentially our results are not completely, our data is not completely analyzed. So you may want to discuss your anticipated results, but you want to be very careful. Ideally, especially as you gain more and more experience, you'll see that it's best to have your data pretty solid so that you write a very clear proposal that then you can really respect all the way through. So you want to describe your results, your expected results, and then you can also, in this component, and this is where you can play. If you're not done with your analysis and you have partial results, then you can also talk about the results in terms of what they can do for the greater society, if you want. So they can be sort of, these results would be helpful for the community that we're targeting. Again, when evaluators get a feeling that the study is not completed, sometimes they may say, you know, I have some concerns, potentially would be better as a poster. So consider the different formats for your research. If you feel like you're still in the preliminary stages and you're only speaking of anticipated results, potentially presenting in the format of a poster is better, so allowing you for more discussion with your audience members and still explaining the work in progress. The final move, which is, oh, here's an example, sorry. But I'll skip it. It's just examples of results. Then we have the final benefits. This one is an interesting one. Often we talk about it in terms of, you know, it can be in terms of the research, the benefits for the field as a whole. So how these results will contribute again to a theoretical orientation, different movement in the field and whatnot. So bringing the communication forward so you can present these benefits. Often we can also speak of the benefits for those who are in the room. And so if you feel as though, you know, I think maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that in the ACLA community, we're research oriented, but with this aim of, you know, improving society, education, our practices and whatnot. And so for those of you might want to talk to your attendees, if you come to my session, this is what you'll learn. This is what you'll get. You can be specific about, you know, what are the values, if you like, of being a member, an attendee at your presentation. So when evaluators look at that, they might think, oh, this is a really good presentation for the pre-service teachers, or this is you know, so thinking again about who are you writing this for, making it salient in your proposal that by choosing your talk, this is what they'll get. Each of these components, you know, there's quite a few, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, about eight moves. If you are to include all of these in your proposal, you're likely to run out of space or words. Donc, effectivement, il y a plusieurs étapes, il y a plusieurs différentes stratégies pour rédiger la proposition de la communication, mais vous n'êtes pas obligé de tout faire et vous pouvez combiner certains moves ensemble. Je n'ai pas le mot pour move, c'est vraiment frustrant. Donc, ça, c'est un peu en grande ligne, là, les éléments d'une proposition que nous, on cherche quand on fait la lecture. So, having these strategic moves in place, in mind, then we can think about, okay, well, how am I being evaluated by the reviewers? And actually, I believe that this information is not always transparent in the sense that I don't think we usually tell the percentage of how it breaks down, but so just so you know, these are all worth roughly 20% each. At one point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, these are worth about 20% each. So it's a pretty clear organization or coherence between the different elements. But what I did for you, and this is the end, if you like, of my more formal presentation. What I did for you is I prepared a little task in a document that you can access that will show you, I'll stop the presentation, that will show you the different moves and the evaluation criteria. So let me show you here. And then in the chat, I will put right away the link so you can access. Oh, I just saw your message, James. I'm so happy that you acknowledged those pictures. It was such a fun conference at York. We were so welcomed. I should have put more. So if you click on that document, you can go directly in there, and then you have access to it. So let me just, where did I put it here? See, if you notice our rubric, I said about 20% each, but so we're looking for topics that are appropriate for ACLA. So when you're thinking about your research and whatnot, you want to make sure it's appropriate for the conference and the attendees. Now, it needs to be a contribution that is, you know, significant. For 20%, we are looking for those theoretical positioning and links. Donc, voyez 20% pour parler du territoire, so territory, and previous research. Donc, if that is missing from your proposal, it shows. Ensuite, la méthodologie, the methodology, it's 20%. You can forget sorry, it shouldn't be there. Methodology for empirical studies. So all of the details of your participants, how you analyze, how you coded, in few words, 20%, c'est important. Maintenant, often we notice there's just a simple lack of clarity or organization because there's so much to put in few words. So have a person who doesn't know your study read it and see, am I missing something? And then finally, we have an overall rubric, 20%. Is this something that I would want to recommend for the attendees? And so keeping that in mind, we are really looking for all of these elements. And so if something is missing from your proposal, then it has a direct impact on your proposal. So in the document that I shared with you, I restated the moves. Alors, I have to apologize. I didn't, I only partially translated. Je suis vraiment désolée, j'ai pas terminé de faire ça en français. Mais ici, oui. Mais ici, je ne l'ai pas fait en français du tout. Ça, je vais vous l'avouer. Mais donc, c'est la même idée. We have all the moves with some letters. And I thought it would be a fun activities for those of you who want to stick around and work on this together to look at this proposal that was, segmented and parsed, if you like. And then for us to, label these different moves with the right letters of the move. And then, by being more aware of these step-by-steps, I think it will help all of us to write better and have more pleasure in writing these because then it becomes a little bit more transparent and then also more enjoyable for those of us evaluating because we'll just see where you're headed and what you're doing. And, unfortunately, sometimes we have these great projects, but we don't know since it's hidden in, some language that is not as clear as we would like. So on that note, all the cameras are off. That is totally fine, but I'm done with what I wanted to share and I'm open to respond to comments and also